Hey there YouTube friends, this is Donnie Smith, and in this video we're going to talk about some of the common problems seen in a body shop and some of the recommended procedures and SOPs. This is some training that I attended while I was at SEMA, and I'm going to share that with you in this video. So be sure and stay tuned and watch this video because I think you're going to find this pretty interesting. And I'd also like to mention our sponsor, collisionblast.com. At collisionblast.com you can receive a free training for the collision repair industry, the DIY, whatever your needs are, you'll find something there that you'll find useful. So be sure and go to collisionblast.com and you can subscribe for free. I attended some different training classes while I was at SEMA, and it seemed like all the classes had one theme, one focus that they was trying to focus on. And that was recommended procedures. You know, there's a lot of cars being built today that, you know, they're just not built like they were in the past. They're very complex, and you know, there's a lot of different metals and materials being used to make these cars, the electronics. So we just can't repair cars the way we did yesterday. So just knowing, you know, the knowledge that you knew yesterday is not going to get you there. So the only way that you're really going to be able to repair these cars is if you pull up the recommended procedures from the manufacturer that tells you, you know, where to section at, or where to, you know, what is recommended to make this repair. And that's kind of what it was focused on. But the first class, it did talk about SOPs, you know, standard operating procedures and recommended procedures. But it also talked about some of the most common problems found in body shops. And these are just kind of the basic problems. And I found that interesting. I want to share this with you. And I'll talk about some of the other trainings in, you know, in a different video. But the name of this class was Importance of Repair Standards in Completing a Safe, Seamless Repair. And this class was taught by Sean Collins and John Spato. There were three of them, and they presented this class. And it's an excellent class, and I'm going to give you some of the highlights over this class. One of the first things that they talked about was blueprinting your repairs, you know, building a repair plan. And that's always been important, you know, to figure out what you're going to do before you do it. You know, work your plan, or plan your work, and then work your plan. So it's a good idea to figure out exactly what's going to need to be done. And this may be the estimator doing that, or they may have it at a shop, may have someone that develops the repair plans. But all this needs to be done. And they gave an example of this like a recipe. You know, someone that makes recipes. And if you make a recipe and leave out one ingredient, it's not going to be right. And the example they used was chocolate chip cookies. If you're making cookies and leave the chocolate chips out, you're not going to have chocolate chip cookies. It doesn't matter if someone like Jamie Oliver, also known as the Naked Chef, he's a well-known chef. You know, if he gets one of these ingredients or one of these recipes and follows it to a T, you know, if the recipe's wrong, it's not going to taste good. It doesn't matter how good you are. Kind of like Chip Foose in the automotive industry. Very talented, but if you don't have the right information, it's not going to end up, you know, it's not going to be the right result. The car's not going to be right. It's not going to be like it was before it was involved in an accident. And you know, the thing about cookies, if something's wrong, it's not going to taste good. Big deal. But if a car's not repaired back to its pre-accidental condition, you know, that could involve unnecessary injuries and even deaths. So it's very important that we get the recommended procedures on these new cars, because they are, you know, they're not built the way they used to. And another thing they mentioned was about SOPs, shop operating procedures. He audits a lot of shops. And you know, he's noticed that a lot of the shops don't use SOPs, or if they are, they're not enforcing them. And the example they give of the problem they was having, for example, if you got 5 body men doing repairs different ways, let's say one of them refinishes their body filler out in 80, and you know, another one 150 and 320, and this technician's applying body filler over paint, and you know, you get all these different types of repair methods going. And it comes to the painters, well, the painters have got to deal with all these different types of repair methods. Nothing's uniform, nothing's the same. You know, it'd be like getting a different hamburger from McDonald's every time. You know, so standard operating procedures would eliminate that to where everybody does everything the same, and that would reduce a lot of the mistakes that are made in the shops. You know, it'd reduce the variations that the painter sees. You know, the painter for one job may have to prime and block one time on this job. Get in from another body shop, you may have to do it 2 or 3 times. So there needs to be a standard way of doing things at a shop, and that really will eliminate a lot of the problems and a lot of the issues that shops have. And another thing I'd like to point out is the pride of a technician. I'm sure you heard it saying there's not many second best painters or body men. For example, everybody thinks they're best, or they strive to be the best. That's what's great about this industry is there's a lot of pride in it, and all the technicians really try their best to be the best in the industry. But along with that comes some complications. For example, this technician's been doing it this way for a long time. Another technician comes in and tells them, well, this is how you should be doing it. That's not going to go over well in this industry. There's a lot of pride there. And, the technicians are the employer, and technicians going to get in a headbutting contest. It reminds me of when I was a kid playing King of the Hill. This is, not video games or not that cartoon they have on. I'm talking about when kids used to actually get outside and play. There'd be a little hill there, and all the kids would see who could be on top of the hill, and whoever's on top of the hill was king of the hill, and the other kids would try to knock them off and stuff. But that's when kids actually got out and played, without a remote in their hand anyway. But anyway, as Sean explained at this class, by having standard operating procedures, everybody will know the way that the shop does them. There's no surprises. There's no who's right, who's wrong. And the recommended procedures from the manufacturers, it's all right there. It's documentation. That's how you do it. And there's no question left on the table, or no variations of who's right and who's wrong. So that really helps out in that way. So when the employer brings the recommended procedures, it's not, I'm telling you to do it this way. It's the documentation. This is the facts. Now, however, that does not mean that the employer or the manager should not, check on the work and make sure that the repairs are being made according to the recommended procedures. But it kind of gets the employer or the boss, manager, kind of out of the loop of being the person trying to headbutt these technicians all the time. So that's another good thing about having the proper documentation. Okay, now to get to the parts with the problems seen in the shops. Sean mentioned that he audits a lot of shops, and he's visited a lot of shops, and he does a lot of research with the products. For example, putting body filler over paint. He's done a lot of testing and research on that, and a lot of audits in shop, and found there to be a common problem with technicians that do this. What happens, there's a chemical in that's used to make that body filler, and I cannot remember the name of it, but that chemical actually attacks the layers of paint. And if it's applied over paint, and it may not happen immediately, but you're going to get repair mapping, and it's going to cause some problems. And that's a common problem that they're seeing. So really, and this is ironic because I just did a video about body filler over paint, and I recommend taking it to the metal, but that is a problem that they're seeing, is it's not being taken to the metal in some areas, and it's the same problem that they're seeing over and over when that's not performed properly. So according to this class, it is a good idea to go ahead, if you're going to be applying body filler, to put it straight over metal. The only alternative, is to put epoxy primer down. This can go, body filler can be applied over epoxy primer. But if you want to be safe, you don't want something to come back and haunt you, take it down to metal. And don't be putting body filler over paint. Another thing that he mentioned, and I didn't really realize this was a problem, but some shops are using lacquer thinner to wipe down their body filler, like a final wipe right before they prime it. And the body filler is absorbing all of that solvents in that thinner, and then after it's primed, it's trying to escape, which is causing some problems. Now, I didn't realize that was a problem, and I myself, wipe it down with wax and grease remover. Now, I'm going to have to check with him to see if that is a problem, because wax and grease remover is a solvent. So I'm not sure if wax and grease remover is a problem. That's something I'll have to check into further myself to find out for sure. But one thing they did mention is lacquer thinner. So if you're using the lacquer thinner to wipe down your body filler and metal, right before you prime, you might stop that, because that has caused some of the same problems over and over in body shops. Another common problem he's seeing in the shops that's causing problems is body filler over plastic, like bumper covers. And this is something that drives me crazy. I've heard of technicians doing that. I've never done that one. They make products for that. They make adhesives, and they even make a flexible parts putty that is designed for plastic. But body filler is not designed for plastic. Plastic design requires more flexibility, and it requires more adhesion. And body fillers, they're having a lot of problems if that's being practiced, putting body filler over the plastic. So if you're doing that, you may look at an alternative way to do that, because that is a problem that he's seeing in quite a few shops. So don't put your body filler over plastic. Another problem that they've seen in some shops is the wrong weld-through primer. This is new to me because we've used weld-through primer. I've always used it, and in the school we use it. But the weld-through primer I use is zinc. It has zinc in it. But I guess there's some weld-through primers out there that have copper. And over the testing that they've done, they found that these copper weld-through primers are causing problems. Long term, they're getting corrosion and a lot of things that weld-through primer is supposed to eliminate. It's not doing that good a job. So you might check see if your weld-through primer is zinc or copper. And if it's copper, you might consider moving to a zinc-based weld-through primer. So that's just something that was kind of new to me, and thought you might not be aware of that also. Another thing is cleaning your welds. After you drill a hole and put a plug weld and you put the metal up against each other, underneath that hole is where you applied that weld-through primer. Now I've welded straight on top of the weld-through primer. I've not had a problem doing that. And I've also cleaned them out. Now the way I've done it is, after the panels are already together, I'll get one of those little spot blasters that push up against there and actually clean that location out. And that's what they recommend doing, because they have ran into some shops having problems with the weld-through primer left on there. Now I don't have the tool, but they demonstrated a tool there that makes this even easier than like the spot blaster, where it only takes a couple seconds per spot weld to clean out and get ready for to weld. And if I get one of those, hopefully I'll get one of those sometime in the future and try it out, and then I'll do a video on that as well. But anyway, however you're doing it, it's a good idea to clean those welds, because that is causing some problems, at some shops they've seen. And while we're talking about spot welds or plug welds, another common problem that they're seeing in body shops is over grinding the plug welds. You have a little build-up, a little mound after a plug weld, and you got to clean that up and you grind it. But they're seeing a lot of those being ground completely smooth and thinning the metal, which weakens the weld. And if you think about it, just right around that hole that you used, that's the only place that is attaching the weld, that panel to the panel underneath it. And that being overground, the metal thin, is causing the weld not to hold up as it should. They recommend not grinding it completely smooth. Leave just a little bit of a mound on there, about like a rivet's what they said. If you'll leave about the amount of a rivet, and then you've got the full strength of the weld. So that's something else that they mentioned. And something else is totally the opposite of that, and that's not grinding at all. Welding up your plug weld and then just priming and painting over it or whatever, but that leads to crevices and things in that weld that can cause corrosion later, and that's another problem that they've ran into. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about, and this is something else that's new to me that I didn't know, and maybe you don't either, and talking about resistant spot welding. And a lot of shops are using that. Most shops use that now, and that's where you have the two arms that come together and they squeeze the metal together, heat it up, and fuse the two pieces of metal together. And that's the way it's done at the factory. But in your estimating guides, like your Mitchell and CCC, if you're replacing a weld-on panel, that's the time you're given, is to use a spot welder. Well, that's a big difference to me. If you're using plug welds and you're given time to do spot welds, a spot weld just takes a couple seconds. You squeeze it, it welds it, and you move to the next one. Well, plug welds, you've got to drill the hole out or punch it out, and then you've got to weld it, and then you've got to come back and dress the welds out. So if you're not using a spot welder, it's going to take you a lot more time as opposed to using if you're not using a spot welder, it's going to take you a lot more time as opposed to using a MIG welder. So that's something I didn't know, that the amount of time that they give you in these guides are for using the resistant type spot welder. And I thought that was interesting, and something I didn't know, and something I thought you may be interested in as well. That pretty well wraps this video up. They went a lot more in depth, and they talked a lot more about welding procedures and quite a few other things. I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that that I thought were important and thought that you may be interested in. I'll be doing a few more videos over these, over some of the other classes that I took, and the other ones are more about the welding process and recommended procedures and things like that. But anyway, I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this video, and be sure, if you like this video, be sure and go down here and like it, leave us a comment, tell us how how you do things at your shop, or anything that's different from what we said. We always like to hear all the different opinions and ideas and ways you're actually doing it out there in the shop. So be sure and leave us a comment, and even if you're DIY, I like to hear from the DIY as well to know what your concerns are and how you're doing things at your home. So leave us a comment, like this, share it with your friends, go to collisionblast.com, subscribe to us, and we'll talk to you next time.